Welcome back, Immigrant Nation. Another week, another new episode. I say it every week, but this week I'm adding an extra to my thank yous, as this is a very special episode, as this episode marks the second anniversary of An Immigrant's Life. So, first, I want to thank my family for all the support. Of course, to you, Immigrant Nation, I will never get tired of expressing my gratitude to your support. It really means so much to me every time you subscribe, follow, or share An Immigrant's Life content. And for my sakes, I hope you never get tired of doing so. Speaking of subscribing, if you haven't, please do subscribe to the podcast. We are available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the podcast platforms, even on YouTube. Also, if you want to reach out, please check my social media accounts. My handle is @AnImmigrant'sLife. You can also email me @AnImmigrant'sLife@yahoo.com. If you want to come on the podcast, or if you know someone that wants to be a guest on the podcast, or if you just want to talk, that's the best way to get in touch with us. Now, let's talk about the episode. Some of us, unfortunately, will never find our purpose in life, but that's not the case for this week's guest. While attending a night market, she had an epiphany. She realized that she could change the world not through protesting in the streets, but by introducing people to her culture through the power of food. This episode is full of joy, tears, as well as hope. So let's not waste more time. Without further ado, let's get into the show. Isa, dalawa, tatlo. Today's guest is the founder of Himalayan Dumplings by Kyikyi. In looks, she's as delicate as the lotus flower, but in spirit, like a conch shell, she's as vocal for the independence of Tibet. Everyone, please welcome Kyikyi.
Thank you so much. That was such a generous introduction. Thank you so much for having me.
Tashi Dele.
Tashi Dele.
Yeah, I've been practicing that word for
Oh.
I even YouTube it.
Yeah.
Like, because I try to have that, like, the greeting from back home kind of. I'm sure I destroyed the pronunciation, but
No, you said it perfectly. The K is a little silent when we speak. So although it's spelled delek, the K is we kind of drop the K. So we say tashi dele.
Okay. That's perfect. Anyways, before we move on, I want to say thank you for coming on the podcast. I know you're a busy woman. Thank you.
Absolutely. My pleasure. My pleasure.
And why don't you tell the Immigrant Nation where they can reach you, or if you want to promote anything?
Sure. Well, if you're in social media, I'm fairly active on Instagram and Facebook. You can join my journey, my immigrant journey. It's under Himalayan Dumplings. So just spelled out Himalayan Dumplings with the S at the end. Or on the website, if you want to look at what kind of food I offer, it's himalayandumplings.com.
Beautiful. Speaking of food, I love food. And you don't make food, by the way. You make art.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind. Thank you.
Well, I don't know, but like I look at it, I'm like, is this like folded by machine or like? But then I saw a video of you doing it. Like, how do you do this?
Yeah, it's a lot of practice. It's a process. It's a result of over 100,000 dumplings hand feeding, and then you get better and better. Yes. So if you saw my D1, it's absolutely not the same. So when people tell me what an amazing, if this is like, it's like artwork, like you said, or if it's made by machine and stuff like that. And, I say, yeah, if you made as many as I did, I'm sure yours would be just as good too.
Nah, I don't think so. I mean, there is Leonardo da Vinci, and then there's people that pretend that they can paint.
It's so kind. Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. Anyways, one thing I would like to talk to you about, obviously, is your background. I know that you were originally, your family is originally from Tibet, right?
Correct.
But where were you born?
I was born and raised in India and Nepal. Yeah, so that's where I spent majority of my childhood, between India, parts of India and Nepal.
Who was the first in your family to seek refuge or asylum?
My parents, and actually my parents, and they were little. So
Okay.
they were very young, must have been no older than 4 or 5. So they were very young when they escaped with their respective parents, so my grandparents, on foot across the Himalayas by night, when it was too cold for Chinese soldiers to stay out and the altitude was too thin. That's when Tibetans would escape on foot in just regular clothes. Yeah, so you can
What?
imagine the frigid conditions. Many people, many Tibetans lost their lives making that trek, that escape across the Himalayas on foot. But yeah, so did my parents. So they were
They
little.
escape through by foot through the
Yeah,
Himalaya, and people like posting stuff on internet like, oh yeah, I crossed the Himalayas with all these bags and equipment. Yo, these
right.
guys are doing it by foot, bro.
Yeah. So you hear about, people escaping by boat and whatnot, but what you don't hear a lot is like people were actually for months trekking across Himalayas on foot in just regular clothes, no special gear, nothing. And many people lost their limbs, their lives, yeah, and so on doing so.
Do they know the area? Like, is there someone that shows them, or they just really like
They
aimlessly
they
walking?
had a guide. They had, because back then, even before Tibet was occupied, there was trade happening between Tibet and Nepal and Tibet and India. So there were traders that were familiar with routes between
Okay.
the two countries. Yeah. So such individuals were typically the ones that guided people to escape Tibet.
But were they charging them, or it was?
I don't believe so. The situation was so horrible and so desperate. Yeah, I don't believe so.
I know people can Google this, but I'd like to ask you anyway, because coming from you, a real, Tibetan, like, why did China came to Tibet and start taking over?
Um, well, for many reasons, but for one, it all comes down to control and greed, I believe.
Mm,
Yeah, everything at the end of the day is all about China's vision for expansion, right? They have openly admitted that they have these expansionist goals, and doing so, Tibet is a geopolitically very important. It stands right between India, the next populous country in the world, and China.
mm,
It's also very rich in mineral resources that most people are unaware of, and also commonly known as a third pole in the world, and is the largest source of fresh water, just second to Arctic. So
oh,
all these resources that are becoming endangered, and people are saying in future water could be like the gold. So anyway, there is a number of reasons, but
okay.
China's claim is that Tibet is a part of China, and so they invaded China. They forcefully invaded Tibet.
Mm,
But us Tibetans, before China invaded Tibet, we had our own passports, our own postal stamps, our own currencies, our own national anthem, our own language, unique language, and so on and
mm,
so forth. And unfortunately, many Chinese, those that live or grew up in China, and in a way, I don't blame them, because Chinese living in China form their opinions based on the information that they're receiving, and much of the information, as the world knows, is heavily censored in China. So
mm,
they hear the Chinese Communist government's narrative of what Tibet is and who Tibet is. And so even today, I get Chinese who have immigrated to the US ask me, "You speak Chinese, right?" And I was like, "No, I don't." And they get surprised. And so I try to gently
mm,
explain, but yeah. So that's kind of the backstory, for many reasons, for geopolitical reasons, but also because Tibet is very, very minerally rich and is being
mm.
exploited. So
Oh, so
yeah,
it's always about the money.
yeah, that's what it comes
Mm.
down to. Yeah,
Unfortunately, people doesn't matter.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
So You grew up in India, you mentioned. Why, which part of India, by the way?
I grew up mainly in Northeast India in a small town called Darjeeling.
Mm.
People who live abroad or in the US may have heard about it if they go to Starbucks to have coffee and stuff. You see, Darjeeling tea is world famous for tea. That's how I normally introduce Darjeeling. But
Okay.
that's where I grew up. It's a very interesting little town, very quaint. And the population there is a mix of Tibetans, Nepalese, and Indians. Yeah, so it's a very interesting confluence of demographics, the community that live there.
Why did your family choose the spot?
I believe it had to do with the proximity when the escape route. Yeah. So a lot of Tibetans who escaped decades ago settled, when it came to India, settled mostly in a place called Darjeeling, which is where we stayed, and then Kalimpong, which is another small town,
Mm.
and then in Delhi, the capital of India, and then there is a place called Dharamsala, which has become like a little Tibet of sorts, where His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama resides.
Mm.
Yeah.
Do you speak what language do they speak there?
Where they're meaning in
Darjeeling.
Darjeeling, the local language is Nepali.
Oh,
It's slightly different than the Nepali that is spoken in Nepal. Yeah, you can tell by the way a person speaks Nepali, whether they're from Darjeeling, whether they're from India, or whether they're from Nepal.
really? It's almost the
Yeah.
same? That's
Yeah, and there are words that are slightly different. But yeah, as a Tibetan, Tibetans typically speak four languages, Tibetan being one of them, and then English, of course, and then Nepali and Hindi.
Speaking of
Yeah.
languages, I saw your post. It's very interesting. You said that an immigrant can be shamed for not speaking English good enough, and then it also can be shamed for not speaking their native language.
Yeah, absolutely. I think many immigrants can relate, no? Or those who have been born here or have immigrant parents.
Mhm.
There is that struggle of trying to fit in with the mainstream population, and then of also embracing your roots. And depending on your age, I think we tend to go through phases of how accepting we are of our roots and how much we embrace them or how much we try to distance ourselves from it. Yeah, so.
Yeah, most definitely. The teenager phase, most of the time, that's the one when you want, like, no, I want to be something else.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
But I did some research on you, as
Mm,
obviously. I heard that you went to a English boarding school.
I did. I
Was it in
did.
Darjeeling or it was somewhere else?
It was in Darjeeling. It's a very, very old school called Mount Hermon, which was built by Christian missionaries because, India was occupied at one point.
Mm.
Yeah. So I went to a Christian boarding school, which is actually pretty common for people that live in that region in Nepal and India to go to a Christian boarding school because most of the bigger boarding schools originated or were started by Christian missionaries. So yes, I went to a Christian boarding school where we had to attend chapels on Sundays or go to chapel every morning for that matter and sing hymns. Bible was actually a subject, Old Testament, New Testament, we had to learn, memorize. So I'm very familiar with the Bible and at least, yeah,
But your
in that
religion,
standpoint.
what was your religion?
I'm a Buddhist, Tibetan
Okay.
Buddhist. Yeah,
Buddhist.
yeah.
Was there a
Yeah.
problem there? Like your parents are, at home you're Buddhist and then at school you're Christian?
Um, yes and no. Yes and no. To a degree, I think there's a little bit of confusion in the child's mind because you're growing up at home surrounded by Buddhist practices and philosophies, and then you go to school where you're spending majority of your year, 9 months out of a year, and there you are, you're surrounded by Christian teachings and things like that. But you quickly learn, being a refugee, you quickly learn to adapt and yeah. So yeah, I learned fairly early on that it is what it is. That when I'm at the school, I will do as I'm followed and I will learn it with an open mind. And so I did. And when I got home at the end of the day, I was confident enough that I I'm a Buddhist when it comes to my philosophy and values. And so that's how it remained.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta survive. You gotta adapt.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
in that area where you grew up, and you said it's a mixture, were there prejudice by the natives, quote unquote natives, towards you guys that just foreigners?
Yeah. Um, to a degree, there was, but it was something that we didn't know any other. So it was normal,
Mm.
There are certain words to describe Tibetans in a derogatory way by the locals. Yeah. And so it was one of those things is like, you know,
It is what it
move
is.
on kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I would say that the Nepali and the Tibetan and even the Indian population that lived there, many had lived there for generations. So it was, for the most part, it was fairly harmonious.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's just go back a little bit with the English boarding school. Did you stay there in the boarding school?
Yeah. So boarding, like an actual border.
Yeah.
So you're living there, you sleep there. So you're
Yeah.
spending 9 months out of a year. We have three months of winter break. But other than that, for all of your childhood, from kindergarten up until the 12th grade, so you're basically growing up in that environment.
Away from your parents.
Yeah. So it is a very normal thing back home, because when I explain to people here, they either one assume like, wow, boarding school, your parents must have been very wealthy.
Yeah.
Which is because the mindset of boarding school here is for the elite kind of, right? Not necessarily over there. Yes, it is a little bit more expensive, and my parents did work 2 jobs to send us there. But yeah, you pretty much grew up there, and it has its advantages as well, because you really learn to survive, because you meet all kinds of kids. Some are more aggressive than others and whatnot, and you really learn to survive in all kinds of environments.
Yeah, definitely. But was it far from your house?
Yeah, it was like a overnight trip. So we would take a bus to cross the borders. So it would be like a 24-hour trip by bus, because that was the cheapest mode of transportation for us. We couldn't afford flying. So yeah, it was an overnight trip. You cross the borders, you come to Indian border, and then there's a checkpoint. You go through the border, a lot of hassling and haggling, and people trying to extort stuff from you. And especially if you're a Tibetan, that's when you really know that you're a Tibetan and you're refugees at the borders. Immediately they can tell from the face you look quite different, and then they're like, where's your paperwork, where's it this, where's it that, okay, what is this? And then you start nitpicking, and then you have to slip in a few $100, whatever, like, okay, please, here's for tea, here it is, and then they'll let us go. It was a routine. We didn't know any other, because we don't, just being a refugees, it was our normal. So yeah, so it was quite far. Yeah.
And here
You
I am
only saw.
complaining about my life,
Yeah.
All those experiences, did you ever question your parents' decision and saying like, why are we living here? Why can't we move somewhere else? Why can't we go back home?
Not at all. Very early on, I think, as most Tibetan parents do, they tell many stories of what happened, how it happened, why it happened, and why we are where we are. And that's why, because we're in exile, because we're refugees and living in someone else's country, it is imperative that we must do our best as we can, whether in education or as a Tibetan living in exile, that we must never forget. And so that really, really stuck with me. Yeah, that really stuck with me. Yeah.
You wrote somewhere that you might likely never be able to set foot in your homeland. How do you reconcile with that thought?
Oh, I don't know that I ever will. Some days I'm better at it. Yeah, some days I can handle it. Some days it makes me very sad. It's a very emotional. Yeah. yeah, it's hard. Some days
Mm.
is harder, some days is easier. You kind of say it is what it is, but you don't give up. The most important thing I feel I have the responsibility as a Tibetan is that you don't forget.
Mm.
And you do your best, regardless of whether it is you that benefited in your lifetime or whether it is your children or the future that benefits from
Mm.
your advocacy. Yeah, so we just do the best we can and just show up, yeah, whenever we can. Yeah, so
Yeah. Why do you think no one cares about Tibet? Because Tibet has been it's on the front page of like George Harrison, right? He did a concert for Tibet, but nothing really happens.
yeah. Oh gosh, that could be a whole different, yeah. It's China has become such an economic powerhouse,
Mm.
and anybody that wants to make economic gains or want access to the Chinese market wants to comply
Mm.
with the Chinese government. They don't want to piss Chinese government off in any way. And Tibet is a hot button topic for the Chinese government, Tibet and Taiwan in particular. They will
Mm.
not tolerate, right? So same thing you see what's happening with Taiwan, a small island doing so well on its own. And yet people are scared to acknowledge Taiwan as a country or invite them to international gatherings and stuff like that for fear of angering the Chinese Communist government.
Mm.
And then you have Tibet. It's like we don't have any military presence or nothing. And on top of that, the Chinese government has become so effective in basically it's become an information black hole.
Mm.
Any information out of Tibet is extremely hard to get because the consequences are so severe for any Tibetans that try to leak information or videos or anything out of Tibet. So with all of that, like I said earlier, it all comes to one's prerogative, right? If your ultimate and your overarching goal is economic gains, and above everything else, humanity, everything else, then yes, you will look the other way. It is easier to look the other way.
Mm.
And that's really what it's coming down to. Everybody wants a piece of the pie when it comes to the Chinese market. And the Chinese government has become so effective at weaponizing its market.
Mm.
Anytime, whether it's BTS band making a statement about South Korea, I can't remember South Korea and Japan or something like that. What did they do? Immediately started fanning the fire of its people, netizens online, boycott BTS. Well, unfortunately, in this case, BTS was too popular that nobody wanted to comply. But that you kind of get an idea what it does. It's like immediately boycott, and then no company wants to be the subject of a boycott by the largest market.
Yeah,
So,
I agree with that. It happens with the NBA, the basketball
yeah,
league. Exactly
yeah,
the same thing. You don't talk about Hong Kong. You don't talk about
yeah,
Taiwan because we're gonna lose that market.
yeah,
Movies, like
right,
I
yeah.
think the most famous one is the which one is that the one with the one of them is like Chinese, but they change it to a woman for some reason because the Chinese
Mm,
government like no, that's not gonna
mm,
happen.
yeah.
But yeah, you
Heavy censorship in Hollywood as well. And I don't think the American public in general realize the extent of self-censorship that is happening within, by the Hollywood executives and decision makers because they want the movie to pass through the gatekeeping of the Chinese
they got
Communist
they want
government.
that money.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what it's all coming down to, really. Yeah.
Let's we're getting a little bit hard here. Let's go a little bit light. How did you end up in the US?
Um, I basically, to make a long story short, in after college in India, I was translating for an American family. They were interested in learning Tibetan Buddhism. So because I knew English, I was translating for them. And I remember one day during one of our conversations, they asked, so what would you like to do? And I was like, I want to go to America. And lo and behold, they sponsored me, and I was able to go to college. So on the third day of my arrival, I was so eager to go to college that on the third day I attended summer school. and it was surreal because and then when I attended school, I remember the first class I attended, it was like an English, I don't know, something essay or something like that. But anyway, I remember the teacher walks in, and I get up from my seat to greet the teacher, and I look around and I'm like, no one's getting up because because back in Nepal and India, it is standard that when the teacher walks in, you get up and say,
Mhm.
"Good morning, sir, so and so. Good morning,
Yeah.
ma'am, so and so." And yeah, this was just one of those funny moments. And then I would call my English teacher, that first class that I attended in the US. I would say, "Sir, so and so," and then one day he goes, "I have never been called sir in my life, and I'm deeply honored and flattered that you call me sir, but you can stop calling me sir."
That's
Yeah.
so funny,
Anyway, just
man.
one of those things.
I
Anyway,
love the story. Thank you for sharing it.
yeah.
But yeah, I was the same thing. I still do call sir just for, because I like saying it. But
Hmm.
some people take offense of that, eh? They like
Yes.
say, "I'm not sir. That's my dad's name."
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
weird. That's so
Right.
funny.
Yeah.
So this family sponsored you to come.
Hmm.
Did
Hmm.
did you have to go back to your parents and like, "Mom, Dad, I'm going to US. These people's gonna help me immigrate."
Um, no, not really, because my parents were very familiar with these people.
Mm,
And so no, and then at that point it was like a golden ticket, an opportunity, because my parents could never afford to send me to college in the US and pay in US dollars and stuff like that. They were teachers, you
mm,
know. So no, they were very excited. It was very bittersweet,
mm,
leaving everything, even though it's not your country, it was still the only home I knew.
mm,
And so it was a very scary, but also very exciting.
mm.
And when I landed, I remember I landed in Oregon. That was the state that I came to. And I was looking for skyscrapers, because in the movies, Hollywood movies, it's just skyscrapers. And I remember asking, like, "So are they going to be, where are the skyscrapers?" And it was all little houses. Yeah. So anyway,
You were
yeah.
disappointed.
I was like, yeah, I was not expecting that. I was expecting concrete, tall
Concrete
skyscrapers
jungle.
everywhere. Yeah. Yeah.
So you went to college in the US, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And of course, like you mentioned, there's some little culture shock, and I'm sure big culture shock. And we also talked about it earlier that depends on your age. Sometimes you push away your culture, sometimes you embrace it. During
Mm-hmm.
those times, were there moments that you forgot that you are Tibetan?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was so eager to fit in. I didn't want to stand out.
Mm,
And of course, my accent was much stronger back then, so people can immediately tell I'm not from the US. Yeah, so people always ask, "Where are you from? What are you? What ethnicity are you?" Or whatever, and stuff like that. So yeah, the first couple of years, I think I really tried very hard to eat American. I ate a lot of junk food. Like I now that I think back in hindsight, I would buy so much junk food because in my mind, somehow in a twisted way, it was my unconscious way of being American. I would buy all American brands of snacks. My apartment was filled with like American snacks, and I would just, I don't know. And yeah, so everything and anything that I felt in my mind represented being American, I tried very hard. And I was especially very conscious of my accent.
mm,
And I still remember right out of college, I finished college very quickly in like 2 years or something like that. And the first job that I applied to was for a marketing company and something like that. And I remember they called me back after the interview to tell me that I didn't get the job. And I remember, and I don't know why this lady, because she was Asian too. So I don't know why she went to the lengths to tell me this, but she was like, our clients won't understand you or be able to pronounce your name.
Yo.
And it shattered my confidence, like shattered. I was just, oh yeah. It took some healing to try and recover and boost my confidence from that time. But yeah, I mean, that was like my preliminary early stages. And then, of course, there were lots of incidents, other incidents and stuff like that I won't bore you with. But it was all related to my accent and stuff like that. So it made me very conscious about how I showed up, or if I didn't look or act American or whatever. So, and alternatively, I found myself distancing myself from my roots because I didn't want to be associated with. I wanted to be accepted as American. I didn't want to be asked where you're from or what's your ethnicity. I got so tired of being asked that. So those are my early years, yeah, in the US.
During those dark times, what healed you?
I don't know that there was any specific incident that healed me, but definitely one person, Cami. Her name is Cami Bishop, and she was my first boss of my first real full-time job in the US. And after that interview, I had several more interviews and I got rejected. I didn't get any of them. And there was a job opening at a community college, and I applied because I was like, what the heck, whatever. I just applied. And it was this lady named Cami who was interviewing for an assistant, for her assistant. And I tell her this all the time, she was like my guardian angel. She really took me under her wings. And in a way, over the years that I've worked with her, she really helped me regain my confidence. In a way, made it okay to accept my roots and be completely fine, even though I had an accent or whatever, and just be comfortable with who I am. So just her embracing me the way she did, I think really helped me on that path. Yeah, towards really embracing. And then motherhood came, and that really accelerated, because then I started questioning, like, who am I? My kids are already half Tibetan and half Cambodians, born in the US, so much further away, literally, from where I grew up. Even though I didn't grow up in Tibet, I grew up in a very big Tibetan community. So all those questions started arising, like, what is my role as a mother? How can I help my kids appreciate and learn more about the Tibetan side of the heritage and stuff like that? And that really accelerated. It was as much of a discovery and learning experience for me as it was for a teaching, which was the original intention. But it became as much a learning experience and self-healing experience for me too.
100%.
Yeah.
Those damn kids makes you be a better person,
Yeah.
I don't want to be a better
Yes.
person because it's hard work.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
But that's beautiful, man. How is it raising American girls for you?
Oh, it's hard. Every day is a struggle. I'm not gonna lie. Parenting is no joke. And for those that don't have parents, don't say, if I'm a parent, I'm gonna do this, I won't do this. When you have a kid, it's a whole different, it's just different. It's just different. And it's much harder, trying to always find that balance between letting them make the mistakes and figuring it out. And just because I am a Tibetan and I grew up with the way I did, and even if my kids are now half Tibetans, I can't, as much as I want them to embrace the Tibetan, our identity, our story, I want them to be advocates for it, I can't force. Sometimes I'm tempted to, and I have to constantly check myself, like, on how aggressive I am. So it's a deliberate, very intentional thing that I have to always check on myself. But I can't project my priorities. Sure, they're very clear on how I feel, but I have to always check myself on not pushing them, because they're not the same as me. Their situation is not the same as me. Plus, they grew up in the US, and the mindset is so different here too. Their ecosystem is so different than the one that I grew up in. So I have to factor those in. But parenting is not easy anyway. And then in this day and age with social media and, oh my gosh, and the plethora of complications and challenges it brings, oh my gosh, parenting is, yeah.
Well, actually, it is easy if you don't care.
Yes. Yes, that's what I was telling my older daughter. She's like, why do you have to go through all my homework and everything? And I was like, it's because I care. I'm taking the time to read some really boring stuff. you know, you know, you know,
Thanks for the
I
confidence,
care.
Mom.
Yeah, I was like, I care. I really do. That's why I'm taking the time to do this. If I didn't care, I was just like, go about your merry way, do your thing.
Yeah, I know. Like last
Yeah.
night, I went to my wife and I went to a parent teacher meeting, and my kids are like, "You don't have to go, Dad. You don't have to go." I'm like, "I have to go. I want to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that I want to meet your teachers when
Mm-hmm.
they're talking to you. When you complain to me, oh, my teacher is boring and whatnot. I want to
Mm-hmm.
sympathize with you. I want to understand
Mm-hmm.
why you're saying that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like you said, they
Yeah.
don't care."
Yeah. And I think it's hard in a way because our perspective of the world, our worldview is based on our experiences,
Mm,
right? And our kids haven't been immigrants. Sure, they are the kids of immigrants, but they
mhm,
haven't been an immigrant. Sure, they're a minority, but still, it's not the same lived experience, right?
mhm,
So it's hard to, I have to, as a parent, remind myself, okay, I have to, okay, decouple. Like, I cannot expect
mm,
them to necessarily always see my worldview because it's not a shared lived experience at all. So
mm.
yeah.
For sure, for sure. I always say to myself, grasp all, lose all.
Exactly.
Mhm,
Exactly. That's so true. Yeah.
mhm.
I mean, my kids have heard their share of back in the days,
Yeah.
when I was young, I had one doll with a broken eye, had blue eyes, one blue eye, and that was the only doll I had, like that.
Yeah.
And sure, my kids have heard it, but they can't really relate because
No.
they're growing in a different situation than I am. So
Yeah. And you can
yeah,
blame them for that anyway.
right,
You know.
right. But I think it is our job as parents to still add perspective of our lived experience so that hopefully one day when they mature and
Mm.
see the broader world that it will
Mm.
add context for them,
I agree. I tell them,
Yeah,
I tell my kids my stories, and I say, I'm not telling you this to copy it
right.
or avoid this. I'm telling you this because this is what happened to me, and you can use this data to live your life however
Mm-hmm,
you want to do with your life.
mm-hmm,
If
mm-hmm,
I messed up, now you're gonna learn that I messed. If you do something, this is what's gonna happen.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Sometimes
Yeah,
they don't listen.
right. That's a kid's job.
You know. But
Yeah.
anyways, I want to congratulate you, by the way, for quitting your full time job. How do you feel?
Thank you. Scary and exciting.
Mm.
Both, both. Yeah,
I'm so happy for you.
definitely.
Tell the people why did you quit your full time job?
Yeah, so I recently gave in my resignation to my day job. During the day, I work as a business development manager. I've been doing that for about 15 years.
Mm.
And so for the past almost 3 years, I have been working two jobs. One, my day job, so I can sustain and make a living and pay the bills. And during that time, I was also working full on in building my brand and launching my brand. Um, but I knew that there would come a time when it's not sustainable on my health either.
Mm.
And so, yeah, that time came and I was like, okay, I can't take it anymore. I'm so tired all the time. So I had actually given my resignation at the beginning of this year, 2022, when I launched.
Mm.
But my company, my employer asked me if I can please extend it. I had given them 3 months notice, so they will have time to find somebody else. I can train them and stuff. So they asked if I could extend it. So I did. And then so I extended again. So then I was like, this time I was like, okay, I think end of this month, okay, I really can't. I won't be doing you any service if I continue anymore because I'm just mentally not there anymore, and
Mm.
I'm tired. So yeah, I hope to commit full on. My company is still so young.
Mm.
It's in its infancy stage, so it can't pay me, which was one of the reasons why I continued working my day job so I can pay my bills.
Mm.
Um, But yeah, I mean, at this point, I'm like, I can only go so long working 2 jobs and be
Definitely.
sane. So yeah, so I just had to draw a line in the sand and say, okay, it's going to be temporary pain. I'm going to be. I've been warming up my kids for a long time. So about a year, they've been hearing, mommy is not going to be making money like I used to. And now they say, I know, check the prices. I know, mommy's poor now. Like that. And because they have to mentally adjust to, right, to my
Mm,
career changes and whatnot, because they are affected
of
volunteer
course.
or in what they're affected. So I have been mentally warming them up for the past year as well. So they know mommy's not going to be making money for a while, but they trust that mommy will do well in future.
Mom is gonna crush it.
Yeah, so that's where we're at.
You're so
Mhm.
brave. I mean, that word has been thrown around so much now, but that is brave. For have to a full-time job that pays well, forget about that and follow my passion because I wanna, follow my passion.
It's seriously one of the most riskiest decision I've made. And being a parent, if I didn't have parents, I mean, if I didn't have kids and or dependents, then yes, that taking that risk, the
Mm,
impacts of it would be mine alone to live, right? If I
mm,
fail or whatever, it's mine to live with. But when you have kids in the equation, then it
mm,
becomes a lot harder because you have a lot more people really depending on you. And so sometimes you feel conflicted, like, or at least I did, am I being selfish in pursuing and whatnot?
mm,
But yeah, I made my peace. I mean, I said, I did what I could. Now, at the age of 45, it's time that I'm going to chase my dreams. And I will be, especially when I found out that the only frozen food brand, the only frozen Momo brand, or the Himalayan dumpling brand in the Himalayan diaspora are few and only owned by non-Tibetan men. That really lit the fire under my feet. And I was like, you know what? I'm still scared, but I will do it because no one else is doing it. So you know what? I will do it now, give it my best. And I hope that by being the first Tibetan and by being the first Tibetan woman to own, and we can own our voice. And I hope it will
mm,
inspire and give a little bit of courage to other Tibetans or other refugees or immigrants who've always been nurtured to stick to the stable, stick to the stable job. That's too risky. Go with this job will always be in demand. We've
mm,
all been through that. So I really hope it will spark that encouragement that, yes, even as a mother, our path towards pursuing our dream will have to be a little bit more calculated and more strategic, because you can't just quit and like, I quit and without a plan. You can't do that as a
mm,
parent because you have dependents. um, but it can be done with some thought and being intentional about it. Yeah.
mhm. Definitely. Can you describe the moment the first time you realized you want to sell Tibetan food?
Yeah. I was at a market called Beaverton Night Market. It was the first night market of its kind in the city where I lived. So they had all these little booths of food of communities that you don't normally hear about in the
Mm,
mainstream restaurant population. And when I went there, took the kids, and I really enjoyed myself, and I saw how people were curious and interested, and it was at that particular event that really sparked, I wish there was a Tibetan booth. Maybe I can do it. I was like, oh, and that really, when I saw the power of food as a gateway, as a very universal gateway, non-threatening, non-political, very beautiful gateway to introduce somebody to another culture that is often not heard about or talked about, then I was like, you know what? I'm going to apply, but it's going to be top secret. Only I know. So I applied in secret. I marked my phone. I have a bunch of alarms on my phone. I marked a reminder, I set a reminder, and then the following year I applied, but I didn't tell anybody because I was so sure I would not get it because I don't have any culinary background or experience. But
mhm.
I wrote my heart out on the application and got accepted. And that was and things just took off from there. It's like the community showed up in ways that just even I'm like, yeah, it's just mind-boggling. So
That's beautiful. But
yeah.
but were you always a good cook at home at least?
Not at all. Not at all. I actually disliked cooking. In a way, I distanced myself from cooking because I felt like it was so drilled in the society that it's a woman's job to cook. So I intentionally distanced myself from cooking, which did not serve me well when I moved to the US because I could only make ramen and, noodles and microwavable stuff and very basic stuff. So I only started learning cooking actually well into my adulthood.
Really?
And it was when I became a parent, when I became pregnant with my first child, that's when I actually genuinely became fascinated by the concept of cooking. So for me, it's one of those things. I don't like doing things because you have to do it or you must do it or you're expected to do it. I have to have a real curiosity about something for myself to be really immersed, and something sparked. Maybe it was the pregnancy and the fact that I will have literally have mouths to feed, that I started becoming very fascinated, and not just by the food itself, but like the cooking techniques and, like more on a scientific level. I started becoming very fascinated by that, and that grew over time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I
Yeah.
don't cook. It put so much pressure on myself because my grandma was a great cook and she was famous in
Mm,
my town.
mm,
If there's a wedding, she's gonna be the chef, no doubt, right?
mm,
So I used to ask her all the time, like, teach me how to cook. So someday I can
mhm,
cook for my woman,
mhm.
because most of my friends that are male, they are great cooks. And because I feel like if my grandma is a great cook and I don't know how to cook, like it doesn't make sense. But she
Yeah.
never taught me, never did.
Mhm,
She always like
mhm,
sit down at the table and be quiet and wait for your food.
mhm, mhm. That was
But
probably a love language, to feed you, just feed
yeah,
you.
yeah. But he thought my dad though. Like
Mhm.
it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you always have the entrepreneurial spirit?
I did actually. I
Mm,
did. I did. And I don't know how much of it has to do with the fact that you're a refugee and you really have to learn to hustle since
mhm.
you're little and just kind of maneuver, navigate your way out of situations and things like that. But yeah, I actually, yeah, I remember I tell my kids this all the time because when they ask me for money, they've heard the story many times. Because I'm like, you have to earn it, you have to earn it, you have to figure out a way to earn things,
Mhm.
But anyway, I must have been around fourth grade or something like that. What I used to do is I used to love comic books, Archie comics like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I would love Archie comics. Anyway, I loved comic books, but comic books were very expensive. So anytime I got money for New Year's, at Tibet New Year's, I would save it all up and then I would buy. That was my indulgence. So in order to maintain my habit, I was like, well, I can't get money fast enough. So what I would do is I would collect all my comic books, take all of my family, my cousins, all of their collections, put it in a bed sheet, haul it in my little body. And I was tiny. I was like smaller than the average person. I was very tiny. Haul it in my body and probably walk a few miles to the stupa. It's like a big stupa where it's like a marketplace. And I would sit outside one of the local shops. I would put down my bed sheet, neatly arrange all my comic books. And then when the kids would be walking around with the parents shopping, the kids are bored, they would sit, the parents would leave the kids and I would rent my comic books for kids to read. And they would pay me like 50 paisa, whatever, which is a currency. They're very little, but still a lot for me back then. um yeah, so that's how I would make money. Soon my business was booming. My business of renting comic books was booming, that I was creating too much of a crowd in front of the shopkeeper's door that he kicked me out.
No way. All by
Yeah,
yourself? You go by yourself?
yeah. My parents asked me, where are you going? Because back then kids would go play for hours and hours, and it was safe, it was okay. And my hours would be, I would be hauling a bed sheet full of comic books, lay it all down, and then say, hey, you want to read comics? Like that.
I
And that's how
love this.
that was my first memory on how I made money. But yeah,
That's
so,
beautiful.
and I did that in boarding school too, and I got in trouble.
What did they say? What did they do?
Um, I was like transactions, which is not allowed, I guess. So every Saturday on weekends, we had rest hour, which is like siesta, so it was half day of school. So we were forced to sleep or rest. And then our warden, our matron would leave. And as soon as she left, I would empty my closet, display all my comic books in it. And there was a library. So I'd say, hey guys, you want to read? So they would pay me money to read. And soon word got out. And then, yeah, I got in trouble and I couldn't do that either. But yes.
Somebody snitch.
Yeah, so yeah.
I love this. What a
Yeah.
hustler.
Yeah, so yeah.
Are you
It's
proud of
similar.
that? You have to be proud of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I tell my parents, and even my kids, hey, I was just being resourceful and creative on how I was not harming anybody, I was just being creative and how I could support my hobbies.
By the way, where do you buy the Archie comics?
They had bookshops in Nepal. There were actually only a couple of bookshops in Nepal and in Darjeeling that sold Archie comics. Yeah. So my idea of America started way back then when I was little. And one of the first things I wanted to do when I came to the US was eat cheese pizza and pull the pizza just like Jughead, which is one of the characters that love to eat. And I was waiting for the cheese to pull because that's how I grew up, and it didn't pull.
Oh my God. So
Yeah.
who do you like? Veronica or what's the other girl's name?
Veronica, Betty. I used to
Yeah.
like Betty. I like Jughead too. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a show now that they did on Netflix, right?
Riverdale. Yeah.
Do you like
But
it?
I think that's kind of like a rated R type of version. I first watched and I was like, hey kids,
Oh no,
mommy's
no.
favorite comic. And then I started watching. I was like, wait a minute, never mind. This is like a rated R version of
That's
yeah.
funny.
Yeah.
Let's go back a little bit with your food. Have you had any Tibetan told you not to teach our quote unquote hidden menu of making
No,
momo to
not
other
at
dishes?
all.
Okay.
Not at all. In fact, quite the opposite. Many Tibetans, especially the younger generation, I get messages, DMs, and things like that. And sometimes people tell me in person how they feel so excited to see Tibetan food being sold like in the mainstream events here, and to see it being popular, that people are actually lining up and waiting an hour to get it. So it's not just about me selling my food, it is our food. I'm representing our culture, so this recognition is our recognition, and hopefully this is just the beginning of people's curiosity to learn more. So no, Tibetans have been very, very supportive.
Love it.
Yeah.
What have you learned about yourself during all this process?
That I can handle a lot more than I give myself credit for. Yeah. I had a lot of fears on pursuing this. Partly when I started exploring the goal of launching a frozen food brand, especially something that has never been done before in a diaspora. And I reached out to community organizations that are there to support small businesses. I was told quite often that it is too big of a goal. And that's why you don't see mom and pop shop scales at the frozen food category. And there is definitely an element of truth to it, but it was also very discouraging hearing that. It's like, it's too complicated, it's too expensive, the barriers to entry are just enormous, and stuff like that. And yes, and it was, like I said earlier, I alluded to that one day I was looking up Momo frozen food brands, and I came across some articles that talked about how this non-Tibetan launched and that non-Tibetan launched, and I was like, you know what? Screw that. Even if it's hard, even if it's going to be no one's done it, whatever. And that day, I found this determination in me, this fire in me, that it keeps me going. That is not to say that I don't get scared. Absolutely. that fear is still there. Every time I take a new risk, that fear is still there. Absolutely. And I feel it's healthy to have a small level of fear, as long as it's not impeding, and being a handicap. I feel it is a good check and balance
Hey, listen,
yeah.
you came from people that crossed the Himalayas on their foot.
Yeah.
No one's gonna stop you.
Oh, yeah.
So you mentioned that your momo is frozen.
Mhm.
Is there preservatives on it or
Mm-mm.
all
No.
natural?
Yeah, all natural, no preservatives needed to freeze it. The really cool thing about dumplings in general, not just momo, but any dumpling, gyoza, mandu, whatever, pot sticker, it freezes really well. The quality of the food, of the dumpling, the integrity of the food, yeah, you will not know. I've heard people say, no, I will not eat frozen. Well, when I have tested to say which one is frozen and which one's fresh, you can't tell them apart because they taste just as fresh. If frozen, if made well and frozen the right technique, the right way, yeah, it freezes really well.
Amazing. Do you ship to Canada?
Not yet.
Come
Um,
on.
I know. I get Tibetans from Canada, Toronto asking, right? And I'm like, dude, Toronto is filled with momo shops. That's the one place in North America where there's so many momo shops aside from Queens. And like, you don't need me to ship. They're like, yeah, we want to support, we want to support. But incrementally, I hope to get there, right? Because my resources are limited. Anytime you are looking to ship beyond borders, it starts getting more complicated from a regulation standpoint, from a cost standpoint, from economies of scale standpoint. So that's why, if I had unlimited resources, sure, I will go right for the biggest goal that I have, but I don't. The reality is I don't. My resources are very limited. I'm self-funded. My business is too new to qualify for business loans. If I do get business loans, the percentages, interests are all in double digits. It's just crazy. So I'm having to be very intentional on how I'm growing and being, taking baby steps. So right now it's just direct sale, hyper local focus, just at the farmers market and at certain events and festivals doing hot food pop-ups. And then now I'm in the process of building my production kitchen and my little storefront. And that next phase of growth will enable me to expand my operations, my production, and then be able to, pursue going outside, shipping outside the state.
I'm so excited for you and proud of you. It's you're an inspiration.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Let's close out with this question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Why should people pay attention to Tibetan culture?
It's not necessarily, when I ask people to please don't forget a Tibetan story, it is as much about not forgetting my story or our story, but it is also a litmus test for people's tolerance of standing up and advocating for those who have smaller voices or no voice at all. So our Tibetan story, sure, it is my story and the story of our people, but it is as much a story of humanity. Tibet is now it's Tibet. If we let a regime get away with such horrendous scale of repression to Tibet, then what's next? Taiwan is already getting there. What? Hong Kong is already getting there. Things that people say that the Chinese government wouldn't dare to do. Now what? Russia invades Ukraine, nobody's doing anything about it. Now what? Who are the other dictatorship regimes that can say, hey, it's all lip service. No one's going to do anything if we do, just go pursue our ambitions to expand, So yeah, for the sake of humanity, I feel that it is important to really try to be an advocate, and for people to advocate for whether it's Tibetan story or another community, awareness, I feel, is really important. And that's why even on my Instagram or Facebook, I try to share, not try to give political facts and whatnot, but try to share it through my lens as an exiled Tibetan, how I feel. And then people can take away what they want to take away from it, And so, yeah, that's how I look at it in terms of requesting people to please don't forget Tibet.
We won't forget Tibet. Again, Tuchi Kyikyi and Sim Janongo.
Oh, Sinjamango. You did your homework. You really did,
I
Aaron.
did. I tried. I really do appreciate you. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely. Such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.